Hi everyone, welcome to our session on Ableism Interrupted. We are so glad to be with you all today, and we're going to go ahead and jump in. The topic of disability and ableism is one that we're all very excited to talk about. So as we begin, the first thing that we'd like to do is just take a minute to center ourselves and acknowledge the land that UW-Madison sits upon. So I'm going to go ahead and read through the land acknowledgement statement that we have. The University of Wisconsin-Madison occupies ancestral Ho-Chunk land, a place their nation has called Dejope since time immemorial. In an 1832 treaty, the Ho-Chunk were forced to cede this territory. Decades of ethnic cleansing followed, when both the federal and state government repeatedly but unsuccessfully sought to forcibly remove the Ho-Chunk from Wisconsin. This history of colonization informs our shared future of collaboration and innovation. Today, UW-Madison respects the inherent sovereignty of the Ho-Chunk Nation, along with the 11 other First Nations of Wisconsin.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kate Lewandowski. And I am one of your presenters for today. Welcome, everybody. It's very exciting to be here today to do this presentation. Before I introduce myself and talk about my role, I want to do a visual description of myself. I'm a white woman. I'm blonde, kind of brownish hair. I'm wearing a black shirt, and that's what you can see. As far as who I am, I'm the Deaf and Hard of Hearing Access Consultant at the McBurney Disability Resource Center, UW-Madison. And what I do is I work with students who are deaf or hard of hearing to determine their eligibility for classroom accommodations. I also work with professors to make sure that all the accommodations are set up in the classroom. In addition, I am deaf. I've been deaf since I was 2 years old. And as part of my communication access, I use American Sign Language to communicate. And I also go back and forth and do use my voice sometimes. Today we have 2 working interpreters off screen. Their names are Sam Heberling and Terry Erline. At the end of the presentation, we'd love to hear your feedback and take questions. So if you'd like to reach us from now on, you can see my email at kate.lewandowski@wisc.edu.
Awesome, thanks Kate. I am Mari Magler. I am the Assistant Dean and Director of the McBurney Disability Resource Center here at UW-Madison as well. I'm going to also do a visual description of myself. I am a white woman. I am wearing a maroon long sleeve shirt with a black vest, and I have sort of a chunky black and silver necklace with a big leaf on it. I am sitting in my office on campus today with a recently cleaned background. My desk, you can kind of see work surface behind me with some overhead filing cabinets as well. Just a little bit about myself. I am also a person with non-apparent disabilities. I have lived with mental health conditions kind of as long as I can remember, late elementary school or junior high for sure. I also kind of early on got hooked into alcohol and drugs as I think a coping mechanism. Definitely addiction has been part of my life and still is today. But I started college initially after high school and put myself through treatment as a sophomore in college, and then took a break from college because I just didn't know how to function sober or clean on a college campus. So my pathway sort of led me away from school for a while And then eventually I went back to school, finished up with a bachelor's in linguistics, went to law school, and have been working first as a sign language interpreter, but then in just other ways working in the disability resource field for about 26 years now. So that's a little bit about myself.
Thanks, Kate and Mari. My name is Patty Cisneros-Prevo. Like the other two, I'm going to start with a description of myself. I am a Mexican-American woman. I have, as of yesterday, I have shoulder-length, dark brown hair. I cut off about 7 inches of my hair. I am wearing long, chunky, dangly gold earrings, and I have a black mock turtleneck shirt with gold and cream designs. I am the Assistant Director of Inclusion and Engagement with Wisconsin Athletics. I have been on the job since January and am learning a lot. I am thankful for Kate and Mari to be able to collaborate on this presentation on ableism. You cannot see, but I am also a wheelchair user. I sustained a spinal cord injury when I was 18 years old and have been in a chair for almost 25 years. Through my disability, I was able to find adaptive sports, and I competed on the U.S. women's wheelchair basketball team for 10 years, competed at 3 Paralympic Games, and am a 2-time Paralympic gold medalist and captain of Team USA. I'm really excited to be here, and hopefully you come away today learning a little bit more about ableism and, even more importantly, how to interrupt ableism in your everyday lives. All right, some logistics. I'm going to read off the screen first. Take care of yourselves. If you have questions during the presentation, please type them into the chat feature. We hope to have time for question and answer at the end. If not, you are welcome to contact any of us after the presentation. A copy of the PowerPoint presentation has been shared with the conference planners and should be available to you. This online format actually provides some forms of access that are not typically explicit. You can stand up, lie down, move around while you participate. You can fidget, make noises, whatever you need to do in order to be comfortable. We recognize that remote participation is a point of access often requested by individuals with disabilities before COVID-19 and often not provided. And we recognize that this format is less accessible for some individuals as well. Please be in the space with us in whatever way works best for you. We will do our best to make sure that the presentation is accessible as well. And one way we do this is by reading all text and describing all visuals on our slides. In order to ensure that the access we needed for this format, to ensure that we had the access for this format, we have pre-recorded this session, and we will do our best to save time for live question and answer at the end. But also encourage you to post questions or comments in the chat as we go.
Okay, so our agenda today has 4 different parts. Part 1 is before we can actually interrupt ableism, we have to be able to define it. What is ableism? Second, we will share different examples of the many different forms of ableism and how you can recognize it, and also how it appears in everyday life. The third component, as we get ready to interrupt ableism, it's essential for us to reframe our perspectives on disability. And then part 4, we will wrap up and share different strategies and tips for how you can interrupt ableism. Okay, let's get started. So we'll start off on this first piece, defining ableism.
What is ableism? Ableism is the act of prejudice or discrimination against people with disabilities and or the devaluation of disability. And I'm going to read that again only because unlike racism and sexism, ableism is often not recognized and definitely not discussed. So the definition of ableism is the act of prejudice or discrimination against people with disabilities and or the devaluation of disability. Ability-based privilege is a set of unearned privileges held by people without disabilities. So some common forms and examples of ability-based privilege is when an able-bodied person parks in an accessible parking spot reserved for people with disabilities, attending events with many people and many environmental stimuli, attending events without needing to arrange accommodations such as an interpreter or request Braille resources. Even as common as knocking on a door is a form of ability-based privilege. And my least favorite is when an able-bodied person uses an accessible toilet reserved for people with disabilities.
Okay, so as Patty mentioned, ableism is very prevalent in our society. There's many different types of privilege that have had substantial impact on identity development while also shaping our larger society. By various institutional practices and policies, common types of privilege that impact our society in the United States can be male privilege, heterosexual privilege, white privilege, Christian privilege, and so on. Most of us are familiar and we do recognize those various types of privilege. And we've developed different tools on how we can address those different types of isms. Because most of us have not been exposed to ableism, we don't have tools to identify ableism. So for that reason, ableism is widely socially accepted.
Okay, moving on, we're going to spend a little bit of time here on microaggressions and what some types of microaggressions related to disability are. This list of 12 on the slide, we're going to read through each of the 12 and give just an example or two of each. And these come from Keller and Galgay in 2010. So the first one on the list, and sorry, I'm pulling my notes here. The first one on the list is a denial of personal identity. And this is where disability is overemphasized for an individual or for a group. So we often see news articles that are focused on how a person overcame their disability. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in depth as we go. Sometimes people are even given preferential treatment for, oh, you have a disability. Oh, let me, do things for you. And what happens is it causes kind of a loss of the whole person, right? It's instead focusing on the disability. The second one is a denial of disability-related experiences. And so this is where the disability is more trivialized or not talked about at all, right? I'm not going to notice the disability. We're not going to talk about that. Or you seem fine. Yeah. Kate, did you want to add anything here?
Yes. I have actually a couple examples for this one and what that can look like related to my experience. So the first example is, and this comes up pretty regularly for myself, and I know for other deaf people as well. If there's a group of hearing people and everybody's talking, and I'm trying my best to follow along in the conversation and see what's going on, if I ask somebody, what did they just say? A common, very typical response that I get is, oh, don't worry about it. I'll tell you later. You know, basically that's ignoring my access or my right to understand. I don't know what's going on. And that later never happens. Typically, I would say 99.9% of the time, nobody follows up and tells me later. So the conversation, what's going on, what's being said, I just don't know. A second example of this that I think is relevant, often when I meet somebody new for the first time, they say, oh, wow, I know ASL, I do. And I'm like, oh, wonderful. And they say, my name is, and then they awkwardly fingerspell something. And that's it. ASL is a full language. It is not a form of broken English. It's not a bunch of gestures. It's actually a full language. So when someone tells me that they know ASL and then, or American Sign Language, and then they just fingerspell a couple things or they sign awkwardly, that's not fluency.
Thanks for that. Moving on, the third one is denial of privacy. So this often happens when people, usually with more apparent disabilities, are just approached randomly by people and asked invasive questions. Oh my gosh, what happened to you? What's wrong with you? Things like that that are you wouldn't do, you wouldn't expect to do. The next one is perceived helplessness. So this is where a person is perceived to be unable to function independently. Patty, you want to chime in?
Yeah, I was going to share an example that just happened to me recently. I went to a pumpkin patch with my husband, who is an able-bodied white male, and my two young kids, 8 and 5. And we were going to get on the little wagon, the carriage, to take us out to the pumpkin patch. And they had a ramp for me to push up. And it was perceived that I couldn't make this decision on my own. And the person who was driving the wagon spoke to my husband, and only my husband, when I was sitting right next to him. And he had asked my husband, oh, is this ramp okay? I know it's steep. Do you think her wheelchair will fit? Do you think you can help push her up? I don't think she'll be able to do it. All the while, I'm right next to them having this conversation. So I think that there was a perception that I was helpless, first of all, where I couldn't make that decision, but also like my ability to push up the ramp. So as I fumed in the pumpkin patch, I thought, well, this is a very teachable moment. And when we returned back to the homestead, I pulled the gentleman aside and I said, listen, this is a form of ableism. You did not direct the conversation to me, and I am the person in the chair. And this is sort of the problem or solution that I needed to solve. And he was very receptive, which was great. But again, a very common microaggression in the world of ableism.
Thanks, Patty. The next one on the list here is secondary gain. So this is where the aggressor wants recognition or even praise for doing something good, right? Or just doing something for someone with a disability. So I'll let Kate chime in about this one too.
Yeah, so often a lot of events that I want to attend are not accessible, which means that I do have to reach out to the event organizer and ask for a sign language interpreter. Often that experience, it takes a lot of communication, it takes a lot of education and explanation. It's access labor for me. It's not as simple as I can just show up and experience the event. often what happens is they do go ahead, find an interpreter, and then the event organizer comes up and says to me at the event, look, I found this interpreter for you. Look at me. And it's like, thanks. I appreciate it, but I feel like they want some extra reward or recognition for that work.
Thanks, Kate. The next one is called spread effect. And so this is where an assumption is made that a disability in a particular functional area also leads to limitations in other functional areas. And I'll let Patty and Kate maybe chime in on this one too.
Yeah, I get this often. Again, I mean, these microaggressions are listed for a reason. We really want to start interrupting these, but I commonly get people speak louder or extra loud to me, and it's almost like they think disability is a one size fits all. Because I am physically in a wheelchair doesn't make me also have other disabilities. And so when people speak at me loudly, I'm assuming that they think I'm also deaf. And that's not the case. And again, with this spread effect microaggression, you can't just assume that people have multiple disabilities because they have one.
Yeah, I've had similar experiences to Patty, and this is pretty common. Sometimes it's not just they assume I have one disability, but I have multiple disabilities. So I am deaf, and I think this has happened to me 2 or 3 times where I get on an airplane, and then when I'm getting off the airplane and walking out of the plane, there's someone standing there who works for the airline company with a wheelchair ready and holding my name, assuming that because I have a disability, that means I need a wheelchair. Another example is sometimes when I go to a restaurant, my husband and I, we are both deaf, we'll be sitting down at the table and the waitress comes over and gives us a Braille menu. So it's a little awkward. Unfortunately, it's more common than you would think.
Awesome. Thank you both. I'm going to run through these next 2 pretty quickly. I think the words themselves are fairly self-explanatory, but the next one is infantilization. So this is really treating a person with a disability as a child, right? Like they don't have agency, they aren't able to handle themselves. And then the next one is patronization, which is kind of a giving praise for every little thing simply because the person has a disability. Patty, did you want to share an example for this one?
Yeah, I think, if we're talking about everyday ableism, this is one that I find being used toward me all the time. I get you're such an inspiration all the time. And one of the ways I see this is when I go grocery shopping. First of all, I hate grocery shopping, I think, which most people do. And then having 2 kids that I have to tug along while I grocery shop is even more painful. But I commonly get, oh, you're such an inspiration. And I'm just like, why is that? Because I am doing a daily task in order to feed my family and essentially to survive. This is not inspiring. It's just what I need to do. The 2 gold medals that I won with Team USA, yeah, you can say that's pretty inspiring, but going to a grocery store or picking up my dry cleaning or getting gas is not inspiring.
Totally. Thanks, Patty. The next example is second-class citizen. So this is where other people are given preferential treatment rather than a disabled person. Next up, we have desexualization. And so this is the phenomenon that people with disabilities are asexual or are incapable of having sexuality, or that disability as a whole is less desirable than non-disabled folks. I'm going to move through these next 2, but then totally, Patty or Kate, if you want to chime in, let me know. The number 11 we're on is exoticism. So this is kind of the opposite, where folks with disabilities are hypersexualized because of the disability, kind of a fascination with the disability. And then the last one is around spiritual intervention, which is able-bodied people kind of praying for or hoping for a cure for disabled folks. And I know a lot of these examples, I think about how they show up I think about folks like me, folks with mental health conditions as well, where it's really non-apparent. And so the way that barriers show up are really different. As we were going through this list, the examples are really helpful. But either of you want to chime in on any last things before we move on? All right, why don't we go ahead on then to the next slide. I'm going to go ahead and just do visual descriptions of what we have on the slide here. It's a series of 4 memes or screenshots. The title of the slide is Ableist Culture. So the first image is a screenshot, and it's basically showing a video that is going to be played. The image of the video is a woman kind of with a hand over her mouth. It looks like she's upset. She's either going to cry or something like that. And the title of the video is The Gift of Sound for the Hearing Impaired. Want to talk a little bit about that one before we move on?
Yes. I'll talk briefly on that one. So I picked this picture for several reasons. The first thing is this actually comes up pretty often for me. I would say once or twice a month. Comes up in my my Facebook feed as something that people are looking at. The point of the picture is a little controversial because there's a lot of assumptions by able-bodied people, by hearing individuals, about what deafness and assumptions about how deafness should be cured. Cochlear implants, well, I should tell you this video is about cochlear implants and their activation. So cochlear implants are a tool that are used to amplify hearing. The implant itself involves a very serious surgery where they implant something into your head. And the activation appointment, typically that's the first time when your cochlear implant is activated. And this is the first time you're hearing with your implant. A lot of people become very emotional, about this appointment, and often it's said, oh, you're finally going to be able to hear. There's an assumption that that activation is going to produce perfect hearing. And it's going to be exactly the same as what hearing people experience. It's a cure. But in reality, for a lot of people, the activation appointment is very emotional. No doubt, it's definitely emotional, but not for the reasons that you would think. Activation appointments often are the first time that there is some sound that is heard, but that sound might not be recognizable. There's a lot of processing work that goes into it, and the person is probably not even sure if it's working. So when the activation happens, it actually takes many years for the deaf person to develop the ability to respond to those sounds or that hearing. It's also an assumption that all deaf people want to be able to hear, which is not true. Some deaf people would like an implant to use as a tool, but deaf people, many of them have their own culture, their own community, and for many deaf people, it's part of their identity and their pride. They're very proud and are happy with their deaf lifestyle. So to assume that all deaf people want to be able to hear is not something that is shared by everybody in the deaf community.
Thanks, Kate. I'll just add to that really briefly that we also have a huge hypocrisy problem in the U.S., especially in how we approach deafness and the use of American Sign Language, right? So we've got, on the one hand, medical providers often, not always, but often advising parents of deaf children to not use sign language with their children because then those children will not learn to speak or to use spoken English, which is, I will just name right now, completely not true. But then at the same time, we have this huge marketing, right, that happens for all these baby sign videos and things that are out there. So if your child is hearing, great, have them learn, have the babies learn sign language. But if they're deaf, then don't do that because they won't learn the normal, and I'm using air quotes specifically here, way of communicating. I'm going to describe the next three memes on the slide, and then Patty will talk a little bit about them together. So in the middle of the slide, we have a visual. It's a black young man in a white tux with a kind of a pink cummerbund and corsage. And he is looking down and kind of holding the hand of a young woman in a wheelchair who is also wearing a pink dress. And the caption at the top of the image says, "He asked her to prom even in her condition," with an exclamation point. And at the bottom it says, "Like and share equals respect." The next meme or photo is on the far right side of the slide. This is a photo or image of a young Stephen Hawking with glasses, kind of wearing a suit coat and smiling. And the caption says, "Stephen Hawking is proof that a disability doesn't stop you being the best you can be. Hashtag RIP Stephen Hawking." And the final meme we have is on the lower left side of the slide. It is an image of the actor who played the character House, Dr. House, in a TV show. It's been a few years now. Some of you might remember. He's looking at the camera with his eyebrows up, and he's got two thumbs up showing. And the caption says, "Oh, you can relate to my rare disease, ... And then at the bottom, because you have a cold."
Okay, so I'm going to just explain these three quickly. All three of these images, and including the first one that Kate described, they all perpetuate common stereotypes about disabilities, that we're pitiful and pathetic, we're better off dead, we're a burden to society, and that we're unable to live a successful, meaningful life without being able to walk. All of these pictures on this screen sort of perpetuate this idea of inspiration porn. I'll take the one right in the middle with the two young kids going to prom. He asked her to prom even in her condition. They're sort of sensationalizing the fact that she's in a chair, he's an able-bodied person, and he's, being so kind and going out of his way to ask her to prom. Again, because we are here to present on ableism, we want you to be actively involved in interrupting these forms of ableism, especially in our social media. I've called out family, I've called out friends when they share memes or pictures. I think they're called GIFs. I'm dating myself. When they share these and they don't understand how that's perpetuating ableist culture, ableist language, and the stereotypes that people with disabilities are faced every day.
Thanks, Patty. Moving on to the next slide. This one is titled Ableist Language, and the slide shows several, I don't know how many here, 15-ish, a little less, text boxes with different words in them. I am going to read through all of the words, and I just want to acknowledge before I start that some of these words are harmful, hurtful, so just wanted to acknowledge that. They may be hard to hear, and also some of them are really hard for me to say, but we want to make sure that we name them and kind of talk through it a little bit. So I'm going to read the words here. disabled, and disabled is all small letters except for a capital A. So the A in abled is capital. Differently abled, physically challenged, deaf and dumb, insane, psycho, retarded, lame, turn a blind eye to, wheelchair bound, crazy, handicapped, special needs, and the final one is use your voice with an exclamation mark. So some of the things that we want to talk about here are just that some of the terms, disabled with a capital A, differently abled, physically challenged. These are all words that people use kind of to avoid using the word disability, right? They are euphemisms, really. So I think the important part that we would want to impart on you all is that disability and disabled are not bad words. These are words that that we use, that folks identify with disability use comfortably, and it's okay to use them. And I think the more that we use other words, we're just perpetuating the belief that there's something wrong with disability, so we're not going to talk about it. So again, always individual choices about how people identify, but just as a general rule. Some of the other terms here, like insane, I got to take a breath, sorry. Insane, psycho, and crazy are words that have been and are often weaponized, really, and used against folks with mental health conditions. And so I think that so many of us, myself even included, and I fit into that category, crazy became such a common word, like, oh, I went to a party, it was so crazy, or I went to a thing, it was so crazy. It's not what I meant. If I'm describing an event, crazy is not the descriptor, it's just a word that has become common. But recognizing that that word has power and is used against folks in ways are things that are important for us to keep in mind. I think that's good. I think I'm going to leave it here for now. Certainly feel free to throw questions that you still have about any of the other terms in the chat, and we'll try to address those as we go. But for now, I think we can move on.
Okay, so up until now, we've been talking about different types of everyday ableism through microaggressions and through different memes or social media pictures that we see, and also with our language. At this point, I want to start thinking about ableism and how it can be embedded into our institutional experiences and processes and policies. Institutional ableism is systematic practices and processes that disadvantage and marginalize disabled people.
Okay, sorry about that. My slides don't always work. This next slide is titled Burden of Proof. I'm going to read this slide first and just mention a little bit about it. People with disabilities often need to prove their disabled status to be determined eligible for a variety of services and accommodations for disability income, accessible housing, transportation, education, which is K through 12 and post-secondary, and employment. Providing proof is typically not an easy task and isn't set up for people with disabilities to navigate easily. Barriers are put in place to make this proof of status difficult on purpose. Which brings me to the Americans with Disabilities Act. On this slide, you have a woven heart to the left. It looks like it's made up of roads and two people standing on either side of this woven heart in the sky. On the right, there's a box that says civil rights law that prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability. The Americans with Disability Act ensures reasonable accommodations to qualified individuals with disabilities. The ADA was signed into law on July 26, 1990 by H.W. Bush. It is one of America's most comprehensive, and I'm going to put that in air quotes and talk about that a little bit here shortly, pieces of civil rights legislation that prohibits discrimination and guarantees that people with disabilities have the same opportunities to participate in mainstream America. But it's not so comprehensive, and it's constantly a work in progress. Because of the ableist language, many people with disabilities have a love and hate relationship with the ADA. When we go back to the definition, reasonable, and again I'm using air quotes, is a form of ableist language. Who decides what is reasonable? What if someone is perceived not to have a reason for accommodations? Who decides this? Are they then declared ineligible to accommodations that they actually need? And this accommodation process is determined by able-bodied individuals. So who are they comparing that to?
If I can just add two really quick points on this, Patty, I think the one thing that I love to remind folks, and you said it, the ADA is a civil rights piece of legislation, right? I think we forget that sometimes. We had amendments to the ADA that happened as well, because what was happening was people were going to court often, and court cases were getting stuck on, does this person even meet the definition of disability? And so this whole, that's not the point. That wasn't the point of the ADA. So amendments occurred that have helped in that sense for sure. But to Patty's earlier point about access to healthcare is kind of like, that's a first step in even determining eligibility for many people. And we know that access to healthcare is not equal in this country. So thanks for letting me just throw that in there. Sorry, and it's me. We're next going to talk about academic ableism and kind of what it looks like or could look like ableism in academia. So the first slide that we have in this category is a photo. If you could, thank you, Patty. This is a photo of Ag Hall. This is one of the buildings here at UW-Madison on campus. It's a beautiful building. It's kind of a stereotypical or iconic campus building that you would expect to see really on any college campus. It's kind of a wide building with 3 visible floors, lots of windows, and then these iconic columns in the front. And the photo is taken from back a ways, but you can note that there are at least, I think, 3 tiers of stairs to access the building. So the text on academic ableism that comes from J. Domage says, academia powerfully mandates able-bodiedness and able-mindedness, as well as other forms of social and communicative hyperability, and this can best be defined as ableism. So even as we look at this image, it's easy to perceive how this building was designed for able-bodied individuals. Where do folks with disabilities get into this building? And if we think back to the establishment of higher education institutions all around, not designed for folks with disabilities, right? Not designed for a lot of categories of people and identities. Disability is one of those.
Okay, so most of our examples of academic ableism focus on the current situation, but it's also important to think about the past and academic ableism that has happened in the past. So it's important to recognize that many institutions have a history of eugenics. UW-Madison is no exception. At the start of the 20th century, Americans were deeply influenced by eugenics, and it was rooted in many of our higher education policies and practices. At UW-Madison, one of the most iconic examples of eugenics philosophy and thought was illustrated by a former president, Charles Van Hise. He was the president from 1903 to 1918. There's a picture of him. He's an older white gentleman. He has a beard. He's sitting very distinguished looking at a book. As a president of UW-Madison, he was a strong supporter of eugenics as an economic way to save financial or federal resources. So when you think about that, he strongly supported sterilization, and he encouraged the establishment of asylums for people with disabilities. And he wasn't ashamed about his opinion. He was very open in sharing his thoughts. You can see by one of his quotes about eugenics what his thoughts were. The quote is, "As a first very moderate step towards the development of the stamina of the human race, defectives should be precluded from continuing the race by some proper method." End quote. So the reason why this is important to mention is recognition that people in leadership positions are very important. As a president of UW-Madison, I can't help but think about how his legacy has influenced all of us, and we're still seeing those examples here today. As you may know, Charles Van Hise was actually the first originator of what's called the Wisconsin idea. This is a practice that we still encourage and follow today. So looking back, how does that impact, and how was that impacted by eugenics, and how did it impact people with disabilities in the past and still to this day?
Our next slide is academic ableism in the classroom. There are 4 points to the left, and to the right there's a picture of an auditorium with stadium style seating. There's stairs to the right, and then a large screen up in front. The auditorium is filled with students sitting in the seats. First of all, students need to go through an eligibility process to receive accommodations. Students are expected to negotiate accommodations from professors. Accommodations are a retrofit. And the last point on the slide, students with disabilities are seen as the exception. The first point relates back to the slide about burden of proof. Students need to go through an eligibility process to receive accommodations. This process is often difficult to navigate. In our second point, students are expected to negotiate accommodations from professors. Students with disabilities are constantly seen as just a few, in air quotes, students, so they're not part of the standard student body, and this is obviously a very harmful narrative. In our third point, disability isn't just a few students and isn't a one-size-fits-all. Disability student services across the country are seeing a rise in student numbers, like more students are aware of their accommodations, there's less stigma around disability, and there's an increased opportunity for college education for people with disabilities. Lastly, when faculty plan and anticipate students with disabilities as part of their classroom and not the exception, the classroom experience is inclusive and welcoming for all students.
Thanks, Patty. And I think I'm just going to jump on that last point that you made. We're talking a lot about ableism and access is really a minimum level. Similar to the ADA as a law, it's great that we have a law, but it is also a minimum level of access for folks. It's not access doesn't equal inclusion necessarily, right? And so I think that what we want to strive for is not only access, but also inclusion, and we've got a lot of work to do there. The next slide that I'm going to talk about briefly is around budget and funding. So again, in the academic ableism category. So the photo on the slide shows a sign language interpreter working with a student. And the points are, first of all, accommodations are costly and seen as a threat to budgets. They can be seen to have a detrimental impact on disabled students, staff, and faculty. And the reason I say this is because oftentimes accommodations that are more expensive are then associated or tied to individuals. So we have groups of folks, certain types of disabilities that are seen to be more expensive, and so, you know, why would we want to take steps to make sure that they're included? We know it's going to cost us more money. Right now on this campus, we have sort of a decentralized funding model, centralized for some things. But if a campus office wanted to host an event and hire sign language interpreters, they would be responsible for those costs. Similarly, currently, if a department wanted to hire a deaf individual who uses interpreters or captioning, they would be responsible for those costs. One way that we could address this is by establishing a central funding model where campus has a built-in budget that would really reduce those financial barriers so that when folks are having interviews and meeting people, that they're really able to freely focus on the individuals and not at all be thinking about costs, which we shouldn't be doing, but we know that it happens. And then finally, disability services offices, there's just always pressure to do more with less resources. And I think that right now is a perfect example of the financial stress that is happening nationwide with the pandemic and additional stressors that are happening there. So I think that we see that disabled employees often have less opportunities for promotions and even just employment. The employment numbers for folks with disabilities, which October is the month for that, is really low. So the employment rates are low. So more to do there as well.
Okay, so as I mentioned with my examples previously of Charles Van Hise, it's important to think about our leadership and how disability is represented in our leadership. On this slide, we have a picture. It's a picture of a very formal meeting. And as I was looking for a picture for this, I found, for the presentation, I found this one. And the caption for this picture reads, Audience members listen to a report about a program review on students with disabilities during the UW Board of Regents meeting at Union South at the University of Wisconsin-Madison on December 8th, 2011. And the photo was taken by Jeff Miller, UW-Madison. So this picture is a picture of a very formal Board of Regents meeting. It's a program review on disabilities, and I chose this picture because you can see what's included visually and what's not included. When you look at the room, it's a very large space at Union South. It's very formal. There's tables with tablecloths, lots of people sitting around these tables. You also see the audience, which is sitting in rows. What I do see, as far as people who are included in this picture, is administrators or people that look like administrators with business coats. Many of them are white. Most of them seem to be male. What I don't see in the photograph are obvious representations of disability. I don't see anybody with a wheelchair. I don't see a sign language interpreter working. I don't see captions being projected on the overhead, the PowerPoint. So when I look at this picture, there's no disability representation at the meeting, even though this is a meeting about disability. What does that mean? When we talk about disability on our campus, who's involved with those discussions? Who's leading those conversations? Do we have leadership that have disabilities themselves or can accurately represent disability?
Our next slide is academic ableism, identity ignored. There is a picture to the left, another auditorium, and a large screen at the front of the room with our very own Kate Lewandowski on the screen. And then students are seated in the seats. Some of them have their hand raised. They look pretty excited. To the right are the 4 points. The first, students do not always have an opportunity to explore disability identity in a non-medicalized context. The second point, disability is rarely recognized as a form of diversity. And for me, as the Assistant Director of Inclusion and Engagement within athletics, I can say this with confidence that disability is often left out of the conversations when we talk about diversity. The third point, lack of opportunity to form cultural or communal connections with other disabled students, we can encourage the formation of a cultural center for disabilities on our campus and on your campus as well. What about a DREAM chapter? DREAM stands for Disability Rights, Education, Activism, and Mentoring. It's a national student organization. And one thing that we have in athletics is our affinity groups for marginalized identities. And disability can easily be an affinity group on campus and other spaces. The last point on the right says students with disabilities are often featured in campus news as overcoming, in air quotes, their disability. When looking for examples of disability diversity at the University of Wisconsin homepage, we just came up with 3 articles about students with disabilities, and they all have the same theme about overcoming their disability. How can you increase the profile of students with disabilities on your campus without it becoming a piece that focuses on how they have overcome their disability? We need to focus more on their identity, what they bring to the table, and what they offer as a student.
Okay, so we want to think now about how to interrupt ableism. It's important to think about how we can, first of all, reframe disability and then different strategies to address ableism. Part of that, when we are reframing disability, is to think about different models that can be used when we're thinking about disability. For those of you who have disability studies background, you're probably familiar with many different models of thinking about disability, but today we're going to focus on the top 2 common models of disability, the medical model and the social model. The medical model is one of the most common models used. The medical model of disability is described as the condition of being, it describes disability as the condition of being unable to perform a task due to an impairment, which is an individual burden. So what that means is that the individual that has the disability is responsible for how to accommodate with the world. When we think about the social model of disability, the social model of disability defines disability as the restriction of activity caused by the design of the environment, which excludes people with disabilities from participating in society. So the social model says that society is what needs to adapt to the person with a disability. It's the opposite of the medical model. The medical model, again, makes the person responsible for adapting to society. The social model is that the environment needs to be redesigned to fit with the individual, and that's just normal.
Moving to the next slide, I'm just going to expand a little bit on the points that Kate already made and think about how each of these models impact us. So under the medical model impact, we've talked a lot already about the eligibility process. I won't spend any more time on that. Activities and environments, again, are just set up with kind of quote-unquote normal people in mind and then have to be retrofitted for any folks with disabilities to participate. Oftentimes, folks with disabilities have a segregated experience or kind of a parallel services are provided. Again, this meets the very minimum requirements. So if I was thinking about accommodations or access from a medical model, I would think about, okay, so that person needs X. What do I need to do for them to be able to participate? Rather than what can I do, right? Getting ahead of myself. And finally, disabled students, staff, and faculty have to ask to be included under medical model. Again, if we look at a social model, some of the impacts are initially just everyone's included. We're starting from that point of inclusivity rather than we have to fix something because of an individual. Inclusive design reduces retrofitting, as we've discussed. Inclusive strategies minimize that segregation, right? We think about how can everyone participate from the beginning. There are best practices out there for inclusive design. Universal design theories is one that certainly you can do some more reading on if you're interested in that topic. And then again, finally, disabled students, staff, and faculty are included by design if we approach things from a social or social justice model.
So what can we do? In this slide at the top, it says, what can I do? It is, there are a bunch of dots on the screen in different colors around dismantling academic ableism requires a multifaceted approach. And we've talked about these things. Now what can you do to address ableism? And keep in mind, you might be perpetuating some of these things. Ableism is everywhere. Be mindful of things and perspectives around you. Think about your own circles. And I can say, and I've shared this with Mari and Kate, as a person with a disability who was also an elite athlete at one point in my life, I think that athletes with disabilities very often perpetuate this idea of ableism. We are often trying to overcome, again in air quotes, our disability. I will not overcome my spinal cord injury, but what I thought as an athlete with a disability is that I wanted to look as less disabled as possible. I have a really narrow and small chair to not seem as disabled as the next person who may use a power chair. I also thought, accommodations were for people that had, more severe disabilities. If there was no elevator or no access point, I would get out of my chair and crawl. Now, these are harmful because not everybody has the same type of disability, and people actually need these accommodations or changes or, breaks on wheelchairs. And what I'm doing is I'm perpetuating this notion, this idea of ableism, even in our circle, my circle as a person with a disability. So I challenge you to think about your own circles and what are ways that you can actively engage in interrupting ableism.
So Finally, we're going to wrap up with strategies on how you can interrupt ableism. Interrupting ableism is not a one-size-fits-all type of approach. There's a lot of different things that you can think about and start doing now, and start recognizing these things and make changes. We're going to make our way around this circle, so Patty and Mari will also be throwing in their comments. The first thing is that we need to recognize and note ableist attitudes and structural non-compliance issues. So one example that I was thinking about related to that could be challenge yourself to not just accept things as standard, but question them. So for example, what is popular right now is wellness activities. We're promoting healthy lifestyle through wellness. If I think about ableism related to that, what is that comment actually saying? What is wellness? Is it promoting an able-bodiedness or a healthy mind?
The next point says advocate and promote disabled people for leadership positions. I took this point in particular because as a wheelchair user, I can say that I am one of few people with disabilities in the athletic department here at the University of Wisconsin. I applaud my director, Sheridan Blanford, for really thinking that people with disabilities can contribute to the greater good. We bring different perspectives and different ideas to the table, which makes it truly a department of diversity and inclusion.
Next up is to encourage representation of disability in campus media, shared governance, committees, social justice events. So I think this is important across all identities, but just as you think about maybe reviewing your own departmental materials, promotional materials, are you thinking about or including disability in those thoughts and plans?
The next one is to incorporate and practice accessibility in the various aspects of your work. So it could be something as simple as starting to ask people who you have not met before or new people if they'd need an accommodation.
The next point, endorse and provide opportunities for identity development and exploration. I think the easiest way to implement this within your department, on your campus, is provide an affinity group for people with disabilities.
Next, this is to support a centralized funding model for accommodations, which we've already talked about, so I'll leave that one stand.
And finally, is to champion research opportunities that raise the profile of access for people with disabilities. As I mentioned before, the university has a history of doing research on people with disabilities for the point of seeking a cure. How can we refocus that research to encourage people with disabilities to be incorporated in research, and that the research we can think of ways to lift up and improve access for people with disabilities. As an example, studying language acquisition, studying American Sign Language, and that would be a way to validate their language.
Awesome. So thank you everybody for sticking with us. We are just wrapping up. We've talked about a lot of things today in our time that we've had. I think we still have a few minutes left that we could switch over to some live questions and answers if we have some. But as we move forward, we just really encourage folks to keep the conversation going, to think about ways that you can actively interrupt ableism, not only on your campus, but in your personal life, in your work setting, for an event that you're planning, in whatever ways they can be big and small, but just keep the conversation going. So thank you so much for joining us today. and we will look forward to a few minutes of some live questions and answers here.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our presentation today. It was nice to see everybody's participation. We want to take our remaining minutes and connect and answer some of the questions that we received. So we will share those out. So again, I'm Kate Lewandowski, and one of the questions that we received a couple times was about identity-first language versus people-first language, or person-first language, and which one is preferred or best used. So I'll start the discussion and give you my thoughts and tell you a little bit about what I use and also what's the difference. So identity-first language versus person-first language. Identity first typically means that the person with a disability prefers to identify with their disability as a type of identity. And so, for example, for myself, I am deaf. And so when I introduce myself, I typically say I'm a deaf person, I'm a deaf woman. And other people, when they identify me, you know, I prefer to be identified as a deaf woman. Person-first language, however, is instead of identifying disability first, the disability is put second or last. So for example, I would be a woman, or there you would say a woman using a wheelchair, or a man who is blind. So you identify the person first, and then the disability second. So there's different types of, there's different groups of thought, and people believe strongly in one view or the other. A lot of disabled activists feel strongly about using identity-first language because it's part of their identity. It's who they are. That's how they see the world. So they use disability-first language. Person-first language is something that a lot of people with a disability, they may feel strongly about that too. They might want to be identified as a person first, and identify the disability second. Many of us who work in the field of disability services in educational environments, we've been trained to use person-first language, typically. But we've come to realize that's not everyone's preference. People have strong opinions and different opinions about this topic. So if you are working with somebody, you can always do a check-in, ask what their preference is. For myself, I do tend to use both in different situations. I'll turn it over to Patty and Mari if they'd like to add any more to this question.
I just want to piggyback on what Kate said. For me, it's a part of my identity. I'm disabled. Just as I introduced myself at the beginning of our presentation as a Mexican American, that's part of my identity. So I always use disabled person. I introduce myself as a wheelchair user. I think something that Mari touched upon in our presentation was that we have to be comfortable using the word disabled. Disability, it's not a bad word. This is who we are, a part of our identity. And so using that language first is what I prefer, and I'm a person with a disability. So like Kate said, ask the person you're speaking with what they prefer.
Awesome. Thank you both. I think really there's nothing much really more for me to add. I think it really does. There are different preferences, as is true for any identity, right? And just it varies from person to person. I did just want to wrap up by, again, thanking everybody. I know that we had more questions come in that we weren't able to get to. The chat was moving really quickly, which we were super excited about, but didn't also want to throw things off.
by participating in that thread too much. Patty and Kate and I would love to continue the conversation. We are already talking about a part 2 informal conversation, maybe sometime this fall even. We'll see if we can put something together, but please do feel free to email any of the 3 of us to continue. If your question didn't get answered, we'd be happy to engage with you over email that way. And mostly just want to say thank you so much for the participation. We're super happy that the conversation was happening today and that we were able to be a part of it. So thank you so much.